In this episode, I'm going to try to briefly explain what is called the Synoptic Problem. The Synoptic Problem is the problem that New Testament scholars have when talking about the Gospels of Mark, Matthew, and Luke. These three Gospels have many shared stories and sayings, sometimes word-for-word copies, but they also have many stories that are unique to their own respective Gospels. Mark is the shortest of the Gospels and is found almost entirely in Matthew and Luke. That is to say, if you removed Mark's Gospel from the Bible, you would still have most of the contents of the Gospel, at least in part, spread around between Matthew and Luke. Besides the stories Matthew and Luke share with Mark, they also have several stories and sayings in common between them, also, at times, word-for-word copies. To make things more complicated, there are stories that Matthew and Mark share, but Luke does not have, as well as stories that Luke and Mark share, but Matthew does not have. There are even stories and details that Mark has, but are not in Matthew and Luke. Matthew and Luke also have content unique to their own Gospels. These include their own infancy narratives, complete with different genealogies of Jesus. Luke has some of the more popular parables, such as the Good Samaritan and Prodigal Son, but Matthew also has his share of popular stories and sayings, including the judgment of the sheep from the goats, and the Great Commission, which has the Trinitarian baptismal formula. Traditionally, Mark is the earliest Gospel, being dated to somewhere around 60 AD. Matthew and Luke were written down a little later and made use of multiple sources. This is where it gets complicated, however. In Matthew and Luke, the material shared with Mark is considered to be taken from Mark. In one theory, material that is shared by both Matthew and Luke is considered to be from a different hypothetical source, which we call Q. Q is from the German word Quelle, which, wait for it, means source. The material, which is unique to Matthew or Luke, is treated as their own unique material. This is the two- or four-source hypothesis. That is, the two sources are Mark and Q, and one may also include Matthew and Luke as their own distinct sources, to make it four sources. There are, of course, other theories that remove the idea of Q, because many scholars seem to have a problem with the idea of Q. Jean-Luc Picard certainly did not like Q. On the opposite end of the spectrum, there is a critical edition of Q, and many scholars talk about Q as if it is a real document, always forgetting that it is hypothetical, and really just stands for the common material between Matthew and Luke. The Synoptic Problem is the problem of scholars forgetting about oral tradition and how hero worship works. Jesus said and did some things all over the Palestinian region. Many people had contact with him, even for just a short period of time. He had his 12 drinking buddies who were with him throughout most of his ministry. These people, and many others, including his family, such as his mother Mary, told stories about him after his death, resurrection, and ascension. These stories were passed around throughout different communities as they were founded by different apostles. Although there are shared stories between the three Synoptic Gospels, there are details in Mark that seem to be ignored or just removed by Matthew and Luke. Matthew and Luke drew upon many oral traditions, some of them shared but many of them unique, in order to compose Gospels with different purposes for different communities. Q is an abstract idea, not something physical. We don't have Q. We only know that Matthew and Luke found some shared traditions in their research for writing their Gospels. And that is how I solved the Synoptic Problem in less than 5 minutes.